I think LMI has been crucial in where our state is going.
This work resonates with people, and watching LMI grow, it tells me that we're really on to something.
When we have collaboration and partnerships that are positive, more students achieve and teachers feel more empowered.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. We're excited to have everyone here. I think there'll be more people popping in. As kind of, a little bit of logistics. We know that there are some teams that are actually meeting physically in the same space, which is a wonderful thing. We're actually able to even do that. I know that some folks are not. So again, if you are sitting in the same room with your team, put an asterisk in front of your name. And then when we do some breakouts, you can meet with your team as opposed to us whisking you away to a breakout room. So that'll help us to understand. And I see Kim Carlson put an asterisk in front of her name. Thank you, Kim. And so we've got some pieces of just logistics and business to take care of. And again, really want to just thank all of you for being here and joining us this morning. We know this has been an incredibly tough year, and we know that people are basically pretty beat and exhausted, and we hope to give you some new things to think about, some new opportunities to consider how we can all work together, and we hope to kind of spark your thinking. Basically, this pre-conference is really kind of an opportunity for all of you, if you're brand new and haven't participated before, to get a broad overview of what the Labor Management Initiative is, what Labor Management Partnership is and is not, what it looks like, et cetera, and to begin kind of your journey here, and to give you a better orientation so that when the main conference starts on the 22nd and 23rd next week, you'll have kind of a good way of kind of being oriented to the various things that people are talking about. So we're, as I said, excited to have you join us, and we're gonna, I know there's still people logging in, but we're gonna get rolling. So you did receive an email, and I just wanted to, again, a little piece of logistics on this. We are on a Zoom meeting platform right now. You did receive an email that also gave you a link to the conference platform. The conference platform is sort of integrated with Zoom, but is separate. Right now, you're in the right place. If you're hearing me, you made it all good, right? But we would encourage you before next week to go ahead and pop onto the conference platform just to get oriented. You can look around, you can see who the speakers are for various breakout sessions. You don't need to do that at the moment, but we encourage you to do that before we get started on the morning of the 22nd. So thank you again for joining us. I'm Ed Honowitz. I'm the project director for the California Labor Management Initiative. We're a project of the CDE Foundation. We'll give you a little bit more info on that. I want to give a big shout out to my colleague and the guy who keeps all of this actually running, and he tries his best to make me look good, which is not an easy job. Gustavo Morales. Thank you, Gustavo. And then we're also joined here by Ann Cummins-Bogan joining us from the great state of Illinois. And Ann has worked with us and works with labor management teams around the country. So thank you, Ann. And let's get rolling here. So as I mentioned, the Labor Management Initiative is part of the CDE Foundation. We are a nonprofit. We work closely with the California Department of Education, with CCEE, California Collaborative for Education Excellence, and we also work with your state associations, almost all the state employee associations, from CTA and AXA and CSESA and CSEA and the whole alphabet soup out there. So again, as we get started, wanted to just encourage everyone to stay on mute. This is kind of set up just as a regular Zoom meeting to be interactive. It's not like a webinar where you're just going to be watching the whole time. So that's the good news. What we want to do is give you, again, a little bit of orientation. So the California Labor Management Initiative has been around since 2015. And we have worked with school district and county office labor management teams in over 170 locations across the state of California. And let's see if we can, there you go. We'll jump into the next slide. You'll see kind of those state associations up on the top that are part of our steering committee. And again, we've worked in, rural, urban, suburban districts, north, south, central, all over the state. So we hope to give you some information that you'll find useful today, and go from there. If anyone is joining late, we just ask you to do two things. One, if you are meeting in a room with your fellow educators, and you're actually physically in the same space, could you rename yourself with the little 3 dots up in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom window, and put an asterisk, and that lets us know that you're actually in the same physical room, and then we won't break you out and take you away from that in breakout rooms. And then also put your district that you're in. So the California Labor Management Initiative, as I say, has been working across the state. We're going to give you a little video here. Sorry, Gustavo, I'm jumping around. And this will give you just a bit of a taste of LMI, and mostly back in the day when we used to meet together, but also from last year's Summer Institute.
We've come to believe that pressure is key to making schools improve. I see absolutely no evidence that that will ever work. The only thing I know that works is collaborative problem solving.
The California Labor Initiative has really helped us to have some structure. This process has helped some of our staff members frame some of their conversations and to really focus on that. We're focused on learning and teaching from the teacher level as well as the students, and also engaging the parents in the work that we're doing.
I think LMI has been crucial in where our state is going. There is a real focus at the state level with all the stakeholders and making sure that teacher voice empowerment with the students, that voice is being heard.
I think this vision comes from the folks in the room doing the work closest with children. And we're counting on that vision and that work.
The work that we've done thus far with the Labor Management Initiative has changed our district in a variety of ways. One is that it has allowed us to put some structures in place that will facilitate communication, will facilitate improved decision-making, and improved collaboration. So the structures is one thing. So the site leadership team, for example, the district leadership team, and how those interplay with each other.
The single biggest thing that this collaboration has brought to our district is the fact that every step of the way, our unions are included. The more knowledge there is out there, the more communication there is, the better it is.
There's a lot of ideas about things that could happen within our schools and within our communities. I think these things are often posed as ideas, and this conference shows that they are manifesting in real ways across the country.
The whole labor management initiative is very important as we look ahead and the things that we're going to be held accountable for.
These times are really difficult for everyone, and we have an opportunity to do things differently. And that's why it's so important that we utilize a collaborative relationship between the union and management. We need to make sure that we have and offer the best educational experience for our students now.
We need actual examples in multiple districts, variations of size and starting points that are moving in this direction, and they're jointly determined by labor and management.
One of the most interesting things is bringing the schools together at a district level and across districts to help people benchmark one another, to figure out best practices, to have resources outside their own building.
The work that Saul Rubenstein has done, it has shown that there's a great urgency. It makes sense for everyone to be in the room together, in the same sandbox together, working together on the common goal of supporting the work that everyone does at the site to improve student learning.
It's interesting to talk about how the Labor Management Initiative has changed things within our district, because what I've been seeing is this incredible increase in the amount of trust that people have with each other. That is so key, that you can't make change unless people believe in the process.
I think the California Labor Management Initiative is critical. I'm only aware of 4 states that are taking this kind of approach at a state level. California is clearly a leader in that.
So that gives you a little bit of a picture of the Labor Management Initiative. And what we're showing you now is kind of a graphic that we've been putting together, which gives you an idea, and we'll come back to this several times throughout the course of this pre-conference, kind of a way of how we've thought about laying out the work. So for those that want to engage, if this work resonates, if this is something that you want to prioritize, these are different kind of elements or stages of building partnerships: launch, build, refine, problem solve, advance, and grow. And our new resource guidebook, which we're debuting next week at the conference, we will have available for you, and it's oriented and kind of built along these 6 modules, and we'll get into more of it. But this gives you kind of an idea. We'll talk a bit about it, and you'll see references in the conference website to these different stages. Today, we're going to focus basically on kind of that launch and build for new teams and for folks that might be a part of a team with some experience but are a new member to it. So moving forward, this work around labor management partnership really requires everybody to work a little bit differently. So for management, that means creating more opportunities for input and to listen to the voices of the men and women doing the work on the ground and their union representatives. For labor, that means actively engaging and helping to drive quality, right? We don't want unions deferring the issues of quality to management. They want to be a part of that and drive it. And that's basically folks coming together around shared goals. So we'll be talking more about shared goals today. We'll be talking about a variety of things, but that's kind of an overview. So if you go to the next piece, this comes to us from ABC Unified, which is actually a real school district, not an acronym. And ABC is a district in LA County. It's a national leader in labor management partnership. And you'll see they kind of define what is this partnering process, right? It's finding at least something to work on together, jointly accomplishing that goal. It's a vehicle for bringing together the key players, and it's built on shared ownership. But here's what it is not, right? It is not denial of identity or personal power of either labor or management. It is not the absence of differences, disagreements, or conflict. It's not a substitute for collective bargaining. It's also not just the act of, occasionally we work together or we do everything together. It's not forced cooperation, and it's not the answer for all the issues you're dealing with. So again, a little bit of an orientation to kind of what is it that we're about. We want to, and again, we'll kind of touch much more deeply on some of these elements in the conference, but we want to bring you something from Andy Hargraves, who is out of Boston College, a really amazing education leader, researcher, works internationally. And he came up with this notion of these kind of quadrants of collaboration, which really are about this idea that everything you do in your system is connected to 2 things, right? Trust, from high to low, and precision, or what he kind of calls this precision, which is really kind of strategies for continuous improvement. So we'll touch on this later, but the main issue is there's a real connection between your ability to move things, to change, to improve, and the levels of trust within your teams. And so, again, what we want to do is get teams moving toward this idea that upper right, high trust, high precision, effective strategies for improvement, along with real trust among the people involved. And that is collaborative professionalism. So outcomes for today, hopefully you'll get a better idea of what the labor management partnership is. You'll get some exposure to some of the research that backs up the impacts of partnership and collaboration. We'll learn about tools and strategies that the Labor Management Initiative and others nationally have developed to help drive partnerships, support this work. And we'll explore that connection between trust and improvement in school districts. So let's move on to our next slide here. We've got our agenda. We're already well into the welcome and introductions, and we're going to touch on the norms of collaboration here. So let's move into that.
Good morning, everybody. it's exciting to be with you and excited for the conversations today. These norms of collaborative work come out of the school of Bob Garmston and adaptive schools. And they're really just, we're sharing them with you in an effort to set mindset for the day. And I think there's a link to this in the chat. And these are things you'll want to take a look at and look at more deeply. Today, we're just going to reference them and ask you to think about them a little bit as you prepare for some collaborative conversations with folks and reflect on your own work and the way you collaborate with colleagues. These norms are really about the way we listen to one another, the way that we come to the table to be open and potentially influenced, even when we feel passionate about things ourselves. So it's about the way we listen. It's the way that we communicate our ideas, intentionally make note of how folks are reacting to what we're saying, and maybe even the nonverbal communication to the extent that we have that opportunity. Trying to have a mindset that everyone's in the room to move toward a common goal, which you saw in the center of the graphic is around advancing quality schools. And then just making sure that we're thinking about learning as much as we are for advocating. In some senses, I think this could be framed as adult SEL. So it's our own self-awareness and our social awareness. Gustavo's going to give us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about who's in the meeting today with a poll. So Gustavo, I'll kick that over to you.
Can I interrupt this? I guess this is maybe one of the norms is like, when you screw up, it's good to like come clean and say, oops, I made a mistake here. So my mistake was not to introduce our wonderful in the background, but absolutely essential colleague, Jesse Siebert, who is putting stuff in the chat for you. So when you see something come up there, thank you, Jesse, sorry about that. Click on the links because there will be expanded material in the links. So there you go. Sorry, Gustavo, all yours.
No problem. Thank you, Ed. So as Anne was saying, these 7 norms of collaborative work really introduce us both to our self-awareness and how we're coming into the meeting today. So we're going to ask you to take a second and put some intention around what your hope is to learn more about and to how you're going to come into the meeting. So in a second, the poll is going to go up. I think it already went up. And so we're going to ask you just to see who's in the room to answer these 3 questions. The first is, what is your role? The second is, have you attended a LMI event in the past? Just for Ed, Ann, and I to know who's in the room. And the third one is, which of these 7 norms are you going to set your intention around today? Is it pausing, taking an opportunity to take a few seconds in your head, paraphrasing, saying back what you just heard, probing, using inquiry, putting ideas on the table and letting them be the group's idea, paying attention to yourself and others, presuming positive presuppositions, or pursuing that balance of advocacy and inquiry, letting go of what you know and going back into inquiry. It's a careful balance we have to take. So when you're ready, go ahead and answer those 3 questions, and we'll be able to see both who is in the room and where our intentions lie as we begin working together and being more aware of ourselves as we come into teaming. And then we'll go into system awareness and how to think about systems and structures as we work together today. So I see we already got that poll going. We have some administrators and union leaders. This is the first LMI event for most participants, so welcome and thank you for joining us. And I love that we're putting intention to paying attention to self and others. I think this is what I try to work on the most, really ensuring that I'm both not just waiting to say something in my head, instead really listening with intent. And I try to work on that at every meeting. So thank you all. I think we have a few more people voting, but I think that might be the 3 of us that haven't voted. So I'm going to turn this back over to Anne, and thank you, everybody. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to turn it over to Ed.
Thanks, Gustavo. So if we look at kind of this idea of, how we work together, there isn't like one right answer to how education ought to look, and we all have different roles within the system. So whatever the system looks like, feels like, your experience being a part of a team, being a part of a labor management team, that's your perspective. So we kind of came across this this cartoon, which we thought kind of makes the point there. And also this notion that, we're trying to improve systems. We're coming out of a pandemic. We're coming into an opportunity to really rethink what is possible, what we might be able to do. But we also know that change isn't done to people, it's done with people. And so that's kind of an overview of how we think of the system. So in terms of like this idea of partnership, one of the things is simply this, and that is that this has to be in your best interest, right? If you don't perceive that moving toward greater levels of partnership, having more trust, more collaborative practices, if you're not feeling like that's in your best interest, that is, that should be a good reason for you to put the brakes on, right? We hope to make the case here as to why this is probably a good direction to go. But again, both sides have to see it in their best interest. This is what we call the Partnership Continuum. And I think there's a link that's going to go up in the chat there, which will give you this graphic. It's really a way of thinking about, what are labor relations within organizations? And it's everywhere from, very adversarial, on the verge of a strike, very hostile environment, through something more, typical, which would be, sometimes we trust each other, sometimes we're communicating, we have a few things we're working on together, but we're largely fairly siloed. And then moving into this, green and blue kind of zone, which really is more about, we're working together in meaningful ways. We're sharing ideas. We have voice from many more places. There's much more diversity of opinion coming into decision making, and this idea of partnership at the far end, which is really kind of this "we won't let each other fail" mentality. So we want to kind of give you an opportunity here to reflect on that. Again, I think the chat, you should have the link to that if you'd like to bring that up in a window and read some of the descriptions in there. And we'd like you to just reflect on what is it that moves teams across that partnership continuum, right? So what are those things that actually get us from being in a adversarial kind of mode to being in a cooperative, more of a partnership mode? So we'll give you a minute to just think about what are the elements that actually would be effective. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms here in just a moment. I just wanted to, for folks that joined us late, if you're meeting in the same room with a whole group of people, and I know that there are a few teams that are, please put an asterisk in front of your name, and then we won't assign you into a breakout room. You can meet with your team and have that discussion. Otherwise, we're going to randomly just take people from around the state, and you'll have a few minutes to have the discussion and talk about some of your thinking about what moves folks across that continuum. So I hope you had an interesting discussion. Thank you for, I think there was a little confusion when we say you're in the same room versus you're actually sitting in a chair in a room across from colleagues in the same physical space. So hopefully that will be a little clearer on the distinction there. So we have, here we go, we got everyone back now. We've got a couple of minutes to kind of share out some of your ideas. So I'm going to invite folks, if you want to raise your hand, you have the option to raise a hand in Zoom here, or you can physically just put your hand up and we'll try and grab people. If somebody would like to give us your thoughts on what helps move teams across that partnership continuum. Anyone would like to come off of mute and give us your thoughts, what you discussed in your group?
I'll say something. it was nice to have a superintendent and a union president in the breakout room. So I want to thank you for that. And in my group, I learned that the union meets monthly with one of the folks there, and then unless needed more than that, and then there's like a Wednesday weekly with the superintendent. So that was helpful for me as a school board member to hear a different perspective outside of my school district. So I want to thank you for that.
Great, thank you. And let's see, I see we've got a couple other folks with their hands up. Victoria?
In our group, we were talking about the importance of trust and how that goes hand in hand with presuming a positive intention, and that without those two things, there really isn't going to be any movement.
Yeah, trust is a challenging dynamic, and we talk a lot about it because we also know that, you know, having absolutely no trust is a problem, but we're not saying you should just have blind trust and trust everybody. It's the balance of that and how we think about and process all of that. Cindy, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, and I'm from the same district as Vicky has just shared, and that is so true. We also talked about trust, that trust is so important. And in addition to that, it goes back to the slide that you shared with us, that Axel, that when we roll things out at the district office, it's done with precision. It's well thought out so that the end users are not dealing with, oh, glitches, so many glitches. Of course, there may be some mistakes here and there, but too many glitches makes everyone frustrated. So trust and precision, I love that graphic organizer, but also too, it was shared that the collaboration before things are rolled out, the teachers union or the end users are meeting with the district to talk about goals. What is the end goal? And then how are we going to develop a timeline for getting this done? And then how do we accomplish the tasks so that it's done effectively? So our board, in our district, our board has a goal of evaluating and implementing things that are effective and efficient and costly and timely. And so it kind of goes along those lines of the board goal. So
right. Great, thank you for sharing that. And so what I heard you talking about was this notion of how we think about that interplay between how precise we are, how we improve, how we roll out initiatives, and that interaction from low to high levels of trust. And we know there's a lot that can happen that can erode trust, or trust gets eroded when, communication isn't effective. A great quote I like is, one of the biggest challenges of communication is the perception that it's happening. And so, we don't, in many places where you all have, been trained and done your pre-service and all of those elements, we don't always talk really overtly about trust, and it's something that you're dealing with every day, as well as power dynamics, and we'll get into some of those elements as well. So thank you for sharing and for giving us some feedback. It's one of the nice sides of having the ability to bring people together virtually is we can also have you instantly talking to people around the state, but we also know it's a little bit of a challenge. So thank you for your grace as we go through the occasionally clunky moments of being virtual here. So I want to move on to the next slide here. And this is kind of interesting. This is fairly new. It comes to us from NEA, the national affiliate for the California Teachers Association. And basically, this is this notion that, you'll see kind of how does labor management collaboration connect to things like negotiations and bargaining, or the other things that unions are doing, like organizing campaigns and whatnot. And the way that they view it, and I thought this was kind of helpful, is this idea that, from the union perspective, and this applies to both classified and certificated unions, although this comes from NEA, is this idea of educator voice. And so there are certainly things that where there are some overlaps, but in the labor management initiative, we do not get involved in your negotiations. We are not there to be a substitute for collective bargaining, but we know that there's this overlap, and kind of keeping in mind if you're doing change processes, sometimes some of that change process winds up necessarily in your contract. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on what we're doing, but getting more voice of the people, the men and women doing the work on the ground of what's working, what's not, helps us improve precision and builds trust. So I'm going to turn it over to Ann here quickly to give us another perspective on sort of how unions are looking at some of the work here.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Cummins-Bogan. I'm excited to be part of the conversation this morning. So just kind of picking up on what you've talked about. So this idea of trust as a foundation and precision. One of the things that we, as I kind of take you through this next segment, which is going to talk about sort of what we know about the impact of labor management partnerships, is one of the things that helps to build trust is to have shared expectations, and I know what I can count on. So we start to think about roles and responsibilities. And as Ed mentioned in the very beginning about, sort of how the work is defined, it sort of takes you from two siloed or, partnerships into a more integrated approach and working differently together. So these three frames of unionism that I'm going to assume are shared in the chat, are a way that a gentleman by the name of Bob Peterson started to think about how the union might need to shift in its more traditional role around, contract collective bargaining, class size, pay, benefits, and start to step into the ownership of our profession. So thinking about, what does quality teaching actually look like, sound like, and in what ways might the union help to promote that? In the original organizing days of the union, it was about, in some, creating due process and in some cases protection. But we also want to think about the notion of owning our profession as educators. What that means then is that the door has to be opened for some conversation around things like what are our strategic priorities, what does our professional development calendar look like, so that the union is at the table with their professional and responsible voice having input on those pieces. And then when we move into this social justice idea, it's really about how do we make sure we include the context of the community in which we work. So we can have really good professional practices, but if we don't take into consideration the lived experiences of our students, the tensions our families might be facing, we can miss the mark. And so, we want to ensure, if we take it all back into the industrial model, that our contracts reflect our commitment to professionalism and social justice. So these are not one over and against another. And that's why the word comprehensive unionism is there, and that the circles are overlapping. They certainly, need to be there, but it starts to open that door about how do we build trust, and it's through the way we work together and sort of our shared expectations. So we have to make space. So then what happens when we do create these collaborative partnerships? So Saul Rubenstein, you actually saw him in the opening video, along with a partner, John McCarthy, who is at Cornell University. Saul teaches labor relations at Rutgers University, first they did a comprehensive study of ABC Unified School District that had been working collaboratively for roughly 20 years and went inside that system to find out sort of from a backward design model what the impact was. They also conducted a pretty comprehensive survey of districts to start to think about what are the indicators. And so 4 big findings from that work, and there's an amazing graphic from NEA that will be shared in the chat. Breaking this slide down, it's really about when we have collaboration and partnerships that are positive, more students achieve, teachers are more dedicated to their schools, they feel a part of something, and there's less teacher turnover. Teachers feel more empowered because they are aware of goals, and they work intentionally to help achieve those. And then in terms of the unions again, and this is again, a lot of this was focused on teacher unions. So we know we have classified leaders in the group today, which is amazing. And I think we can transfer that to the idea that when the union is involved in professional conversations, whether that's about, being safe on school buses or teaching students, that the union itself becomes a professional organization. We're talking with one another. We can go to the next slide. This next graphic that I just sort of summarized this, it speaks for itself. It's a great graphic that NEA has pulled together. So we can go to the next slide. So it's really, this is another way of synthesizing it. So if we have low collaboration, low partnership, what they found was that conversations and relationships are pretty transactional. I will give you this if you give me that. I will stay, whereas if we move into high collaboration partnerships, the conversations shift. So we're talking about school improvement. We're talking about, the way that we have effective teaching in every single classroom, the way our paraeducators support that and become valuable members, not just assistants who are at the side, the way that, again, for our classified folks, the way that, we can bring in the voices of our food nutrition folks that might have a sense of how students are feeling in the lunchroom, or what they might be noticing about a student's dispositions. Just pushing, really reiterating that point about, when we create space, we can focus on things that are important for kids. When we don't do that, we fill up a lot of time talking about adult issues, and that does not move student achievement. So part of the work from Saul Rubenstein and John McCarthy is they identified 5 tangible attributes of partnership. So surprisingly, right, communication and trust are not here. But again, I think it underscores this notion that we build trust through the ways we work together. So the 5 attributes that they've identified, and again, you have access to this, are around peer collaboration, which is around, the way that we share information, the way that we informally mentor one another in our work. Discretion. So, do I have, we know we want all of our students to be proficient writers. Do I, as a professional, have some leeway in how I might make that happen? Shared goals. So we are driving the train through a common purpose. Psychological safety, so that I can come and tell you what I've done differently or talk about the mistakes that I've made. And then finally, shared decision making. We are at the table talking about decisions together. So this is, an exercise I think, I certainly have as a practitioner, as a consultant, going into school districts and helping folks think about partnership. We can go to the next slide. These 5 attributes help me as a diagnostician when I help districts through needs assessment, because one of the things I want to know about is, what are the goals? Do we know what the goals are? Sometimes districts know, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we have beautiful strategic plans, but no one necessarily knows what's in them. But when we all know where we're headed, where we're trying to go, it creates an opportunity for greater discretion, because I can say, okay, so I know you want me to get to this point, but I think I have a different way of doing it based on what's happening in the context of my work. And then when we have that goal and then the safety to be to have the discretion, we can talk about it, which means we have psychological safety. Obviously, if we are talking and collaborating, we're talking about our goals and refinements to goals, and the way that we're working toward them together emerge through those conversations. And finally, in the shared decision-making mode, we create responsibility and shared accountability, because I now have skin in the game. I know that I'm partially responsible for making that happen. So that's a really quick speed date on attributes of partnership, but there are some wonderful resources that you'll be able to dive into. One area we want to spend just a little bit more time around is this notion of shared decision-making. So we're going to move to the next slide. This is a tool that we have found to be invaluable to teams that are trying to figure out that dance of, how do we collaborate? And I would also encourage you to think of this not only as the way you make decisions, but the way that you work together. So on 2 ends of this continuum, we basically have mine and yours. So these are the things I do in my daily work. I make my decisions. I don't necessarily tell anyone about it. So my background is I was a teacher, right? So I did my lesson planning. I taught my students. I might pivot from a lesson. I do it seamlessly. I don't announce to my students that I'm changing the lesson plan. When we get to position 2, this is where I may not have been involved in the actual planning of the decision, but someone's going to let me know that it's coming down the pipe prior to implementation. Sometimes people think that's collaboration. And sometimes and again, I think that a key point to say here is that there's really no bad place on this continuum, but it's around the shared expectation. So if I feel that by informing you prior to implementation gives you enough ability to be part of this journey professionally, maybe that's appropriate. But what sometimes happens is we think informing is collaborating and others may not. I'm just going to quickly move down this continuum. When we're at a position 3, this is what the author of this, Dr. Patrick Dolan, would say is the most dangerous place in the continuum. And that is when we consult others before we make a decision. So just to bring a real simple idea, if you have more than one child and you ask them where they want to go for dinner, and 2 of them want pizza and 1 of them wants tacos, and you decide on tacos, they will think that you already had planned to get tacos and it was just fake. You weren't really interested in pizza, right? So when we are consulting folks, one of the ways we build trust is by sharing the rationale for the decision once it's made. At that position 4, this is where we find teams get into trouble because they think that shared decision-making is co-construction through consensus. And we know that that is not always feasible. It's not necessarily economical and maybe not even appropriate. But by having some conversations about how we're going to make decisions, we can build trust. When we move to the other end of the continuum, if you're an administrator, I think there's a lot of administrators in the room. Sometimes you might think of this as you're giving some space to maybe teacher teams, to paraeducators, for teachers, even to students, to say, you get to choose what you'd like to do, but please check with me before you move into that decision. The 6th position is, you got it, go for it. Just let me know what you've decided. And then in a position 7, it's really your decision. You don't need to tell me. So when we have trust and when we start to behave, this tool builds trust, we can have the confidence in the positive presupposition that people are acting in our best interest. When we don't have trust, positions 1 and 2 can feel like micromanagement. Positions 6 and 7 can feel like neglect. So we need to, constantly think about how are we communicating this? So sometimes teams will put this in the center of the table and talk about how are we making this decision. So we want to give you a few minutes to think about this notion of attributes of partnership and then decision making. And again, the best way to learn is to kind of put yourself in the position of and experiencing that. So on the next slide, we have a prompt, and we want you to think about a time that you engaged in decision making where potentially you were mainly just informing others. This is what I've decided, this is what I'm going to do. And again, if it's easier to take this to your personal life, because sometimes that's a good place to frame it, think about that. What's a time you were maybe co-constructing an agreement and working with others toward true consensus? And then is there an opportunity that you've had to engage others in taking responsibility for the decision? And then kind of thinking about what was it about that decision that motivated you to either just make the decision yourself, work collaboratively to make sure the decision was, something that everybody wanted to own, and the other where you sort of step out of it and say, this really is not my decision. I'd like it to be up to you. So we're going to go into breakout rooms for just about 5 minutes. And again, this will be random unless you are sitting in a room with someone, and just kind of think about how decision making, how you've experienced it or how you've facilitated it in your own work. All righty, just like that, here we are. I always like to ask who was in the middle of something brilliant when you got beamed back into the main room, right? You're like literally mid-sentence. So just wanted to open it up and see if anyone wanted to raise a hand and share a little bit about your conversation. One of the things to kind of consider is how might putting some language around the way you make your decisions help to foster that trust. But what came up in your breakout rooms that might be good for others to hear? Anybody willing to share?
So we were talking about, once again, how information is communicated to members or to everybody within the district. Because if it's just we were talking about the COVID and how, things just kept changing right and left. However, if it's just coming from district office saying you will do this because of this, within our district, it becomes, okay, here it is again. District is just telling us what to do. Nobody's getting anybody else's opinion, and etc. And so it breeds, well, the mistrust grows within that. And so we were talking about also about the importance of meetings, having, some of us have monthly meetings with district, with unions and stuff like that, and how that also helps building the trust. And along with the fact, bringing for union members, bringing other union members into meetings so that their perspective can be heard, because that's crucial. Because as union members too, we don't want to go back and it be like, okay, the union's in bed with the district, and this is what or the district or the union is trying to say.
Yeah,
the union's trying to become authoritative as well. So these are things that we have to be really cautious of, and within our district, because we're in state receivership and everything that we've gone through, it's that trust and collaboration is crucial for us.
Yeah, and I think one of the things just that I would call out as I heard you talk about, it can feel, and perhaps it's real, that the decisions are being made by the district and being sent down. And then sometimes what we find is there was a process for shared decision making, but not very many people knew about it. So the other key piece that we talk about here is the notion of broadcasting, so that when the decision, hey, we had to pivot again, we did consult with, 45 different staff members from different buildings along with a community survey, and this is what people felt. So just giving that little bit of information, because that's, we can make the assumption that, somebody just made a last minute decision, and COVID certainly, created that scenario because it was about safety. The other thing I just want to underscore that you just said, Ava, is the idea of, really having set structures for communication, so meetings, and then also it's almost like the union has to do its work, like in that industrial, professional, and social justice frame around, this is who we are as an organization, this is where we're going, this is why we're partnering the way we are, and administration has to do the same. And not everybody's always on the same page about what's appropriate and what's not. So thank you. That was awesome. Anybody else willing to share in your breakout room? Maybe one more person?
Yes, hi, Ann. This is Art Jimenez from Westminster School District. And I had the privilege of meeting with the board member. And so that was a unique perspective and an interesting conversation. I feel very fortunate to have that opportunity. And one of the questions that came up is like, how does the board fit into this puzzle, right? How do the pieces come together at the board level when it comes to, shared decision-making or the decision-making process of labor and management? One of the things that we talked about was, how it really starts at the top, right? How the board setting the district's vision and setting the mission, working with the superintendent, and having like a clear kind of like a roadmap for labor management, right? For the school district, for the community at large. Of what are those goals and what's the vision of our school district, and then therefore how do our decisions that we make impact, enhance or promote that the board goals and vision for the district. So like really even the board is involved. While they might not be at the table or they might not be directly physically sitting down in the meetings or where these decisions are being had, but definitely their influence based on the vision and the mission and the goals that they set for the district, is definitely should be present at our meetings and at the table, because it's that vision, it's those goals that we have that we need to strive to work towards too.
Yeah, and I think it's really being clear that we're building a culture that supports collaboration and partnership, and we need the board in on that conversation, and not only that, but even setting policy that influences that. Ed, I don't know if you'd like to say any more as a former board member yourself, but just the role of the board is critical for sure.
Yeah, I think Ann touched on a really important piece, which is one of the roles of a school board is really to sort of set policy, obviously set basic direction, but also this idea of what is the culture of the organization. Boards actually have a lot of ability to weigh in on that and help create and message, their interest in sort of a, distributed leadership, collaborative processes, et cetera. The way we look at it within the California Labor Management Initiative is we subscribe to basically the way that the California School Boards Association looks at it, which is that board members really should not be in the management work. They shouldn't be in micromanaging. They shouldn't be in the details of implementation. But we do encourage board members to be a part of this work, to meet with you and be a part of your team. We'll talk a little bit about structures and having like a board liaison to a labor management learning team is a good move. But again, there's always the balance for the board around, staying in their policy role versus getting into implementation. So I wanted to say, in addition that one thing that's I think really useful about that tool, and we've had a lot of good feedback from teams that have used that 7-point decision-making tool, it gives you some language to talk about process. And process is really important because it's connected to trust. If people don't understand the process, they tend not to trust what's going on. And it gets back to this, the less you know, the more you suspect. So if we're not communicating effectively, if process isn't clear, or I thought we were going to be, co-constructing this, solution, and then suddenly you went and, decided on it, that can be really corrosive to trust. But if we've got clarity, we've got shared language on how we describe it, that will help in that issue. Likewise, I just wanted to point out, there are times when you want really robust, quote, democratic processes with lots of input, right? If you're making a decision that has a lot of impact on a lot of people, right? And that could be anything from closing schools or changing attendance boundaries or things that are going to have a lot of people, that are going to bear the consequences. You probably want a much more robust, inclusive process. And so that takes time. And sometimes that we found this in the course of the pandemic, when people were in an emergency, they were sort of feeling driven. I got to make a decision right now. It's an emergency, things are, on fire here, and, we've got to decide. But you give up something, which is building more of an inclusive process where people feel ownership and feel heard. So it's really having this balance. And we hope that tool that we just showed you gives you some language around how you might share what you're doing and why, when you're deciding to use one particular mode or another, et cetera. There's no one is better or more, correct than another, but thinking about which type of decision-making process you use when is important. So we're gonna move on now to something that we want to share with you that we've came across, which we think is really useful and kind of an insightful way to think about sort of some of the work that you're all engaged in. This comes to us from Simon Sinek, who is just an absolute wonderful thinker. He does international kind of seminars and consulting, has written numerous books, and really, really sharp guy. You'll see that in a moment. But this comes to us actually from LinkedIn, right? So Sinek does a lot of work with businesses. We know that schools are not businesses. We don't expect schools to operate like businesses, but we think there's some really good insights, because any kind of large organization that has a real sort of, need to be effective. These kinds of things apply. So we want to give you a chance to listen to Simon Sinek, and then on the other side, we'll talk about it and go from there. So let's play this video. I think you'll enjoy it.
A finite game is a game in which there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. The players are known, the rules are agreed upon, and the objective is to win the game. And when the game is won, when the game comes to a conclusion, the game ends and we all go home. Football, for example. And then there's an infinite game. An infinite game has known and unknown players. The rules are changeable and you can play however you want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives. There's no such thing as winning in friendship. There's no such thing as winning in marriage. There's definitely no such thing as winning global politics, and there's no such thing as winning business. Nobody's declared the winner of business. But if we think about it, and we listen to the words of too many leaders, they don't actually know the game they're playing. They talk about being number one, being the best, or beating their competition. The problem is, when we play with a finite mindset in a game that has no finish line, there's some very predictable and consistent outcomes. There's the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation, and eventually the demise of the organization.
So what does it look like to run an organization with an infinite mindset?
Leaders who have an infinite mindset, instead of showing up to win, they show up to advance a just cause, something bigger than themselves, a vision of an idealized future so compelling, so just, that people would willingly sacrifice to be there. That could mean turning down a better paying job or working late hours or frequent business trips. And though we may not like these things, they feel worth it because I feel a part of something bigger than myself. They have trusting teams. Organizations that don't have trusting teams, people show up every single day hiding mistakes, pretending that they know what they're doing when they don't, refusing to ask for help, and eventually things start to crack and even break. But infinite-minded organizations, they are obsessed with ensuring that the culture is so strong that people feel safe amongst their own, as willing to ask for help and things like that. They also have changed their mindset away from having competitors, but rather to having worthy rivals. So a competitor is someone we want to beat, obviously, where a worthy rival is another player in the game who is worthy of comparison, and their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses. These infinite-minded organizations obsessed with who's actually better than they are, so they can learn more about themselves. They also have a capacity for something called existential flexibility, which means the willingness to make a profound strategic shift in order to advance the cause, a better way to advance the cause, even if it might mean short-term loss or short-term frustration. One of the best examples of this was in the 1970s when Steve Jobs and a bunch of his senior executives visited Xerox PARC, and Xerox showed them a new invention called the graphic user interface, which allowed people to use computers by moving a mouse. And here was Jobs with a just cause to empower individuals to stand up to Big Brother. He imagined a day where one day an individual would be able to compete with an organization. And he says to his executives after they left Xerox, he says, we have to invest in this. We have to invest in this graphic user interface thing. And one of the voices of reason in the room says, Steve, we can't. We've already invested millions of dollars and countless man hours in something else. We can't do that. We'll blow up our own company. To which Jobs said, better we should blow it up than someone else. That decision led to the Macintosh. In other words, he was willing to walk away from the strategy that they were following in order to pivot the entire organization to advance the cause a much better way. And then finally, the courage to lead, because all of the things that I'm talking about are really, really, really difficult. It's much easier to run a company quarterly or at most annually, as opposed to trying to think of a cause we want to advance. It's so much easier to just hire and fire people willy-nilly and not focus on culture and building trust. It takes so much work to be a good leader and create an environment in which people want to work at their natural best. And at the end of the day, it's the infinite-minded leaders who will do what's right rather than what's expedient. It's hard.
Is that something you can influence when you're not at the very top of the company?
Absolutely. It's more expedient when it comes from the top, of course, and you can use your job to advance your own just cause. And so at the end of the day, we don't have to resign ourselves to the fact that the senior leaders are short-term focused and there's nothing we can do. That's true. We can't change them. But we can show up to work every single day and be the leaders we wish we had.
So I hope you enjoyed some of that insight from Simon Sinek. And even though that's kind of, he's primarily working with businesses, I think much of what he talks about is really part of the work of the school organizations, of the Labor Management Initiative. And, we think that this idea of how we interact with each other, he talked about sort of that idea of existential flexibility. How willing are we to rethink what we're doing? In some ways, the pandemic has given us the opportunity to rethink some of what we are doing. And the question is, are we going to seize that and do something connected to our just cause? Or are we going to slide back into, let's get back into the normal we knew and were comfortable with, even if we knew there were lots of inequities and problems, et cetera. So I just loved the challenge that he kind of throws to us. And I want to kick it over to Anne, who's going to walk us through a few things to think about.
I think one of the things that struck me when I saw this video is just starting to think about the notion of leadership, because in education, it is different than business, because we are all leaders in our respective roles. It's just a matter of where our leadership lives in some ways. And so it's important for us to grasp this notion of how am I, especially as a union leader, administrator and board member, which you're going to see in just a short bit of time here, really lay the foundation for that key collaborative move. But I also see, and one of the things that's so wonderful about this work is that when we find good theory and research, we see it being repetitive. So this notion of a just cause around really clear goals and priorities that are really, really valuable. The idea of psychological safety and trusting teams, that we know that we can make mistakes and be honest and ask questions. The willingness to be influenced through where we're headed and again, where we need to go. We might have created a strategic plan, and in the implementation of it, even though it's a 5-year plan, we find out in the first 6 months that we've missed the mark on something. Well, we've got to pivot if we're going to be successful. And the idea of worthy rivals, this to me, I think about this in my own practice, is if we have a commitment to working in partnership and to being mutually supportive, who's exhibiting those traits in a way that I might be more fearful or not sure of? And so how can I start to, he talks about when we are in the room with worthy rivals, they almost force introspection because they're doing things that we say to ourselves, that's really interesting. That person seems courageous, is able to take that leap. So how do we really push each other to be our best through the actions and the way that we engage? And then of course, courage, because as they said, this is not easy stuff. So what we thought, again, just to kind of reinforce that today is about setting your vision, setting your foundational understanding of the value of partnerships. Which of these pieces do you feel are most important to you right now? Developing that just cause, making sure everybody understands that this is really an imperative set of work, building that trust in our teams, setting up conditions where we're working at our very best and leading the way by example, being willing to be influenced by what we think, might be a better solution, even though we had planned this, and then that courage. So there's 2 questions, and we thought maybe you would just find a spot to jot it in your own journal. Certainly, if you have some ideas, you could throw them in the chat and we can look at one another's thinking. The second side of this then is, which of these do you think might be the greatest challenge for you? And that could be because of your own personal disposition and experiences. It could be because of the context and the environment in which you're currently working. So we're just going to sit quietly for a couple minutes and ask folks to reflect on these 2 questions. Okay, looks like people are being introspective, which is wonderful. The chat is always there if you choose to share. So Ed, you're going to take us into the LMI approach.
Thanks, Anne. So, you know, part of this, and you'll see again, this graphic we'll use a couple of times, in this launch phase, right, as you're just beginning to come together to bring a group together, there really is this issue around both, you know, how do we, you know, are we going to make a commitment to build a partnership, to build a collaborative culture, and then what is our shared vision and purpose? I love the way that Simon Sinek talks about it as a just cause, right? Because, you know, everybody's got a mission and vision statement someplace, but how connected are people to it, right? Whereas if you've got a just cause that people helped create and are articulating, that's hugely powerful and motivating. So we're going to go through a few pieces here of how we might sort of move toward that. And one piece is this: we know that you know, this work is incredibly complex. We know that people really need some assistance, tools, ability to come together, work effectively. And one of those things that we've built and is part of our new resource guidebook, which you will be debuting next week, we're excited about it, is that notion of creating sort of a shared, oh, there we go. Thank you. A shared vision, right, is a critical, important beginning step. We don't expect you, even if you're sitting in the same room with a team, to, like, you know, while we're on this, you know, morning, you're going to come up with your just cause and powerful shared vision. We know that takes time. That's a process. And we do also know that, you know, you have existing stuff. You probably have some materials that the school board, the district has adopted that, you know, hopefully had a robust process and all. We're not talking about people necessarily throwing out what you've got, or, you know, but the question is, how do we build off of that? How do we get more people engaged in it? And how do we move toward this idea of shared vision? So we'll be kind of focusing, if we can get to the next, I think this has got a little animation, then what you're seeing there is actually a new collaborative problem-solving tool, which again is kind of something we'll see. There's a workshop on it next week that you can participate in. We actually have a video about using this tool. We don't have time in this pre-conference to get into all the detail of it, but the idea is people need structures, process, and the ability and space to come together and talk about how they're going to work together and what that vision and shared goal kind of space is. So if we look at this next set of work around how we're going to launch and build, because if you're a new team, this is basically the work ahead. And I did want to point out, you'll see these kind of launch, build, refine, problem solve, advance, and grow tagged on workshops for next week. So if you're really focused on some of those beginning launch and build stages, you can get a clue as to what workshop you might want to participate in based on their connection to this kind of 6 elements of partnership. So let's take a look at a couple of folks that created some mission vision statements that have worked with us. And again, what you'll see here is these were kind of, I'm not going to read them, you can look at them there, connected both to the work of the overall school system and to their labor management team and the process and what they wanted to say about how they would commit to each other to do this hard work, even though we know, you know, this work of building partnership is not the absence of conflict. It's not the absence of disagreement suddenly goes away, but how are we going to work together when we've got all of that? So you'll see from both Mountain View and Alisal a couple of statements here. We encourage teams to work on that together. And we know that this kind of work of creating sort of shared vision, shared commitments takes time. Oftentimes there's a lot of distrust, baggage from years of people not communicating effectively, people getting stuck on this thing happened to me, X number of years ago, and it still hurts me. It's, sticks in my mind, and it's hard for me to move past it. These are opportunities for us to kind of try to come together and build some new relationships, but build relationships that are also assisted by a lot of process and the research behind all of that. So if we move into the next slide, we're going to take a minute here, and we want you to think about this idea of what are some critical priorities for partnership. You've gotten a little bit of information from some of the research, from listening to Cynic, to having some insight based on your own experiences. And what we'd like you to do is to think about this idea of what are critical priorities in order to build a partnership. So what we've done to assist you is we have built out a couple of Jamboards. I don't know if people are familiar with Google Jamboards. You may have used them before. They're pretty simple. You'll be able to shortly in the chat, you'll see we actually created 4 different links so that, you know, if you want to you're with a team and you're sitting in the same room together, you can pick one of those links and go there. You might go and have folks from various places around the state join you in inserting some information in those. But you'll see.
So if I could jump in here, Ed,
Oh,
I'm gonna, yeah, the breakout rooms, before you choose your Jamboard, be sure to go into your breakout room first. So your whole team will be on the same Jamboard. They only allow us to put about 25 people in each Jamboard. So when you get into your breakout room, go ahead and with your team, choose a Jamboard, and Jesse is putting them in the chat now. And go ahead and click into those Jamboards. Then we're gonna ask you together as a team to go ahead and fill in that Jamboard with different critical priorities for partnership, really thinking about elements of developing your vision and purpose. What would you bring to the table as you begin thinking about your vision and shared purpose as a critical priority for you in your position as a part of the labor management team? So again, we're going to ask you now to think of that or jot it down somewhere. What are those critical priorities that you, in your position, will bring to the table as you begin developing your shared vision and purpose? So as you think about that, in a few moments, not yet, Jesse will open up the breakout rooms. Once you're in that breakout room, we're gonna ask you to share and jot down so that everyone in the room, when we deliver these Jamboards to you after the conclusion of this session, you have some thinking ideas as you start developing your vision and purpose. So go ahead and take about 47 more seconds to think about that. And then Jesse will open up those rooms. And as a team, choose the Jamboard you're gonna log into. And then go ahead and start recording those critical priorities.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So we were able to check out those Jamboards, and as Gustavo said, they will be available, and you can start to notice some themes that were generated. And so we're going to pivot now to talking a little bit, building on this launch and build idea, that once we have the shared commitment to collaboration and a set of shared priorities, how do we start to build the structures? So Gustavo is going to share this idea, and this comes from the work of Dr. Patrick Dolan, and we're going to see him in a video here in just a few moments. And his work really centered around organizational change in systems. So a bulk of his work was less concerned about the what of the work and really about the how. So in what ways do we create structures so that we truly are listening and learning, continually reflecting, and sort of, having the courage to make those shifts, like we heard Simon Sinek talk about, when we find out something isn't going as planned. So we build these structures at the district level, and you see that that's inclusive of the superintendent, union leadership, admin, and board members. Although, as Ed mentioned, board members are typically not involved in the the day-to-day operation of the district learning team as it relates to the district goals. The school learning teams, which model the system that's set at the district level, and then we, really at the end of the day have deep, robust collaboration among grade levels. So we're going to let Dr. Dolan explain his thinking. One of the things you might see right here on the screen before we hit play is this. Patrick Dolan passed away a little over 3 years ago, and this was recorded at a conference we did in Illinois. And at the same time that he was talking about his theory, he was talking about the coherence framework that Michael Fullen has developed, along with Joanne Quinn, to talk about the way that we, work as a system with clear goals, accountability, deep learning or pedagogical practices, and collaborative processes. So he's going to make reference to that other frame, but what we're focused on in this video is the notion of building structures that allow you to align goals and create two-way communication for continuous improvement.
The last piece then that I would transition kind of to a how, so that we deepen the discussion somewhat, and we've already had 2 examples of people talking about it. In a top-down kind of militarized model with flow like this constantly, I think the way you move to an organizational change process, and we're doing it a bunch of places. I'll use Corona Norco as an example here of something that is going pretty well, but also I can get into the difficulties in the 2nd and 3rd year, right? I think you have to build some sort of a learning and collaborative place at the district level. Almost nobody does it. And the reason you have to do that is you have to have union and management someplace where they actually own the work, the place, all right, together. And I say that because of many years of going into these places as a consultant, and if you interview the union, they know all the bad stuff, and the management knows all the good stuff. And then you get them together in the room and you say, here's the reality, and they say, oh, that couldn't be. And you say, what do you mean? And they'll tell you again, all right, what they know is the reality, and they deny each other's reality. There is no place where they actually, these 2 powerful entities actually can say, this is where we are. Believe it or not, that simple journey early on of truth-telling about what's real, what is working and what isn't working, we have no venues for that. None at all. All right? None at all. You have to create this simply to get on the common ground, and it takes you about a year or 2 of truth-telling to take the risk, psychologically safe and so forth, to start talking straight around this. And my union sisters and brothers here, when we first get in here, the union comes, then it beats the crap out of the management early on, and the management doesn't quite know how to play that game, all right? They go off. No, they don't. They go off and they say, meow, 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 meow. All right? But they don't know in that moment how to say to Christy, I don't think that's right, and so forth. All right? So you first of all have to learn how to do this, and in the process you create some what. But the process of what they work on to your issue ought not come so much from here. I mean, we know what but if you have a site structure that's authentic enough that it's got the principal and staff, support staff, and teaching staff chosen by them, so that this is also a collaborative we at the school site, and you drive it off of deep, good, all right, thoughtful PLC work, in which these folks are talking about pedagogy and results and so forth, and you then build a process of listening and learning together, all right, from the work itself and the men and women who do the work talking to each other, and you keep kind of trying to cultivate strength here, and you stay close to teaching and learning issues. And you have a place here where you say, how are we doing? You don't manage it. You listen and learn together how you're doing. And I add a piece because I think it's critical. You must learn how to talk to the whole system about what you're learning. You must learn to broadcast, to tell the story. This place always has a story about how it's doing. but in some senses they make it up, or they think the principal is in charge of that. You want a collaborative process saying, we just listened to this, the chemistry group and physics, and this is how we're engaging here, and we're missing this learner, and so we're talk truth-telling to everybody, short, one page, electronic. This is how we are learning together. When you do that, you create community, you have a collaborative process that grows and so forth, and this group here needs to start listening to those site structures, and the only question you want to ask when you visit them and so forth is, what are you learning and what do we need to know and change here? So that you are building a counter-collaborative process of listening, learning, engagement, and accountability that goes to that first piece that changes. It comes out of here in a reverse process that comes here, but you must put this in place. And then your shift, your deep change, notice there's two changes. One is the change around kind of what you address and how you do it. But the deep shift is a process shift of the way you work together. The culture of working together, risk-taking, truth-telling, openness, and so forth. You can't learn that, all right? You can't learn that in a seminar. You must learn that in action research, working and listening to each other in a healing way. The last piece is, early on, this work is healing work. And then by what I mean by that is, this thing doesn't want to do what it is you think it wants to do. Step up, take it, own it, move it. They want you to do it. And they want you to bitch about it. All right? Those are not full adult ways to live, but we get used to them. And so at least you left the opening and say, oh, how would you do this? Well, this is a way structure.
So a couple of things to mention. One is that Patrick always looked at the system through a lens of pathology. He was a practitioner, and he knew that the way we've structured our school system is inherently flawed. With the power and command at the top of the system and pretty architecturally removed, if you will, from the day-to-day interactions of educators and their students. Now, again, we want to make sure we're not dismissing the contributions of teaching and learning personnel. So this could happen. Dolan did a lot of his work in the steel industry. He did a lot of his work with Ford Motors and Boeing. And so in that situation, it was about building connections between, sometimes it would be the folks on the line up to the management that were making the decisions. So again, I'm not sure what everyone's role in the district is, but again, if I'm going to use the notion of transportation or food and nutrition services, your day-to-day experiences in your work and the challenges and the successes you're having need to be shared so that those in the position of power that maybe are deciding how many bus routes we need or staggering lunch schedules support an effective way of doing business. So that's the first piece, is to make sure that you understand that he's describing this lens of pathology. The other piece that he's driving home here is that there is a cognitive exercise to this work that is establishing goals and then setting up structures. But the biggest challenge is to begin to do the work in a different way. So it is, for administration, opening the door and being willing to be influenced by the day-to-day experiences of your employees. For unions, whether it's classified or certificated, it's understanding that your voice at that table is not simply to provide feedback and tell what the challenges are, but also to contribute to solutions. To also think about, this is some responsibility that we can share with you. The research from Rutgers and Cornell talk about the fact that the district level commitment is critical because it really provides the cover, if you will, at the school site so that principals can be collaborative with their staff, so that union reps can be collaborative with principals and teachers in general. So when you're starting out this process, and again, the other thing I wanted to acknowledge, I see in the room we have Dr. Oriano from Trona, California. That's a small system, you know, one sort of K-12 school in a sense, right? I know there's more than one school. And then we've got Westminster, where you are, you know, larger, you are primarily elementary and middle as far as I can tell. And then we have Inglewood, and I know there are others, right? So for each of you in your own context of your district, you set up these structures in a way that makes sense for you. But some of the guiding principles when you're starting this out is that at that district level, you are modeling what collaboration looks like and making sure that the voices of all stakeholders are engaged. There is a fair amount of diagnostics and needs assessment. So these tools that LMI is providing to you give you sort of the where we want to go. So we have to start with where are we? Figuring out the ways that you can collaborate around strategic priorities. One of the nice things about education is that we have endless amounts of things we need to work on. So how can we come to the table and share those? And then ultimately, it's getting into how do we help structure or restructure teams at the school level that typically exist. There's typically a school leadership team, whether it's grade level department chairs or you know, teacher leaders that have been engaged. Oftentimes we do find though that classified does not have a voice at that table. In fact, sometimes classified is not even participating in staff meetings at school sites. So that's another, you know, just caveat. But the point of the guiding principles of this collaborative team is then to say, this is where we said we wanted to go. This is how we're gonna get there. And how do we know if we're making progress? One of the other things Dolan alluded to was the difficulties in the second or third year. So the first year is all about, you know, when you start to take on this work, it's about establishing those processes, and it's sometimes really exciting. But once you start to build and work that system, you know, there could be transition in union leadership. There can be transition in board members. There can be transition in superintendents. So how do we come back and reestablish our commitment, which is why it's critical. And I guess the last piece, we can go to the next slide. The last piece of this, Dolan was my personal mentor. He would say to me, Anne, you will know a system is functioning well when you walk through schools and you see quality and deep collaboration among staff and faculty that's focused on students. Because what that tells us then is that this vision at the district level around, you know, creating positive outcomes for students has been interpreted and owned at the school level and is being translated to the deep collaboration at the grade level. And again, when we go to the Rutgers and Cornell research, we find that in high partnership schools, teachers are collaborating at least weekly, talking about instruction, talking about mentoring, talking about curriculum, sharing instructional practices. Finally, the wonderful collaborative problem-solving tool that the LMI has developed is really something then can get utilized. Again, if we start at the sort of the bottom of the pyramid, if you will, this could be what happens between teachers or paraprofessionals and the students that they teach, up to the school level team, up to the district. So again, this is sort of speed dating through the process, but once you've developed that collaborative commitment, if you follow the LMI elements of partnership, your next move then is going to be starting to think about what are the structures we either want to develop or reflect on that we have in place.
Thanks, Anne. So, you know, just a couple of things that crossed my mind as you were talking. We're not prescriptive about, you know, it's got to look just like this, or you've got to use these exact structures. This is really about you taking this work and contextualizing it and making it your own. So you'll see in different places, you know, folks have called, you know, their team we've got the West Contra Costa Solutions team, and they have a process for meeting and they have structures and they're trying to build that out. We want you to make this work so it becomes your organization, your team's approach to this work. It won't look the same everywhere because the contexts are so different. But the main thing around some of those principles and some of the work is that, as we've worked with teams across the state, we found there were three things that just at every level, whether you're in the build, in launch, or you're refining, or you're trying to institutionalize this work, or all of those elements, problem solve, these three pillars of collaboration just kept coming up over and over, and they thread their way through all the work. The issues of trust, of equity, and of communications. And so we're going to take a little bit of time to kind of dive into that. And, I wanted to sort of have you, think about, sometimes we talk about this issue of, and what does it look, sound, and feel like? Anne mentioned that, for Dolan, who worked in multiple industries and spent the later half of his career working and consulting with school districts around the country, this idea that you could walk into a school and you could feel the fact that, people were very focused on outcomes for students. There was trust. There was a high level of precision, right? We talked about that notion that Hargraves had, right? So people were really clear on structures, process, how they were listening to each other, how they're working together. And at the end of the day, this really comes down to, again, how do we think about process and structure and never lose track of the issues of trust, equity, and communication as you go through this. So what we'd like to do is, and I think we've got that document in the chat there, give you a little bit of time to think about what that looks like, right? There's kind of some descriptions in there. There's some descriptions and some quotes that give you kind of some talking points to play off of. We found that teams have used this tool as a way to, whether you're in a staff meeting and you want to talk to, school site staff about these three issues of trust, equity, and communication, or your district learning team wants to begin its process talking about these, this is a good way to kind of use some language, give you some prompts to think about, because ultimately you've got to own this work. It's about your context, the way it comes together in your organization. So what we'd like you to do is individually think for a minute, and hopefully you can look at that document and journal for a couple of minutes around how might labor and management leaders build trust with each other at the site, with site leaders and with community, and think about the connections to equity and communications. So take a look at the document, think through those for a little bit, do some journaling, and we'll come back and we'll do some team time discussions of this. So before we get into our breakout rooms, I did want to say we're very excited about our new resource guidebook, and you'll see this document in there along with most of the stuff that we've been looking at today, kind of organized with a lot of content and comment around sort of what does that look like, prompt questions for teams, ways to think about these issues, connections to California professional leadership standards. And what we're trying to do is provide tools, resources, context for you to build off of this and make it your own. So we're gonna jump into some breakout rooms and then have you with your colleagues in those rooms talk about what came up for you as you thought about ways to connect and talk about trust through the system and connect that as well to equity and communication. So let's go into the breakout rooms and give people a chance to chat. For the Kings County Office of Ed team, has the process worked out all right, just logistically for you, being in the same room with hopefully no feedback or problems?
Hi, Ed. No, it's working out really well for us. Unfortunately, we only have our first today, but we will have a team on the 22nd, 23rd. So we're really looking forward to that. And it's been nice for us today, I think, to be able to have the conversations in person as we go through this process.
Great, great. Well, thanks for joining us. And, we're excited to see people starting to meet again. It is a challenge building trust, going through having hard conversations and doing it, with little boxes on your computer screen is certainly a challenge. And so we're excited that I think we're coming out the other side here to some extent and able to meet in person and be teams. I just wanted to open it up to see if folks wanted to share kind of some thoughts, some comments on the discussions you had in your room. Does anyone want to jump in?
Oh, I'm Westminster Teachers Association president. Hi. I think for us, we're definitely building trust and equity and communication. We have a system in which we meet with the assistant soups. But I think the lower layer, maybe the executive director is a system for that as well. It's like every other week, or I don't know, whatever we agree to. So that would be an added bonus. Because they're the implementation of the rollout of programs and things like that. Where we feel like we've not been able to trust is during bargaining. Any sort of bargaining, and I think it lends itself to that because we're just always on opposite sides and of the equation. You know, we ask for a certain percentage, they ask for, they reply with another, and it just seems as if that is where we always run into this, like, definitely not being able to work through the process and not even having a process to work through it as well to get to a consensus of what is fair and equitable during bargaining. So I think that's what we're going to have to work on during this next bargaining round.
Yeah, and Kim, I think you bring up a really good point because there are a lot of shared goals and you want this big robust process around, what does implementation look like? How should we create this shared vision and all of those things? And then I think what we found is for teams that are early on in this process, sometimes they'll go, okay, we have to stop because now we're in negotiations. And I think what you find is as people continue and they build more deeper sort of levels of understanding how to work together, they can say, all right, we're in some contentious negotiations over here, but over there, right, in this team that's working on, building a collaborative solution, we want to keep going and move that forward. And we know we're going to have some tough, discussions around negotiations, but they're able to kind of separate that. Ultimately, the work of labor management, partnership, and collaboration does not take the place of collective bargaining, but we've also found that teams that are getting deeper and deeper into the work, it makes it easier in negotiation because you've already said, well, we know these are shared goals. We know that this is something we want to work on together, and that can help, and as you build relationships as well. But again, this is tough stuff, and as you go, you kind of build more opportunities to think about processes, and people hopefully are more attuned to what builds trust and what erodes trust. Other comments that came up or thoughts that people have who want to share one or two things before we go over to Gustavo?
Yes, I'll just throw in my 2 cents. I think I'm a site administrator, so just reflecting on this, I found in the past that it's really helpful. And whenever you're making a big change at the site, especially when it comes to the teacher's practice, or you'd like to implement something different, that as simple as it sounds, you explain the why to it, and that you try to elicit feedback whenever possible, because from a communication standpoint, it's been my experience that builds trust. And one thing I also mentioned in our breakout from a trust standpoint is working on projects and things together. You can't help but to have a dialogue that's really hopefully student-centered. And I find that goes a long way to really hitting all 3 of those boxes there: trust, equity, and communication.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Brent. I mean, the work, as Dolan said at one point of the video, right? This, you don't learn this stuff at a seminar, you do it in action research, interacting with each other, learning from each other. And as you work on projects together, that's what, you build trust, and you see, is the other person trustworthy? Are they doing what they said they were going to do? Did they follow through? Did we, agree on things, at least in terms of process, even if we, have disagreements on how things might ultimately get decided or played out. So thanks for the comments there. Gustavo, you want to take us home here? And
Yeah, thank you, Ed. So as we come to the close of today's session, we wanted to offer up a few, I know you've been seeing me plug a few Summer Institute opportunities. So I'm going to take a quick second to share my screen and show you the Summer Institute platform. We're really excited to put this in front of you. You might have already got an invite, and if you're already registered, great. We're happy to see you there, but we invite you over the next week to go ahead and check out the event platform. You'll see a welcome here. The agenda is then placed here. You can see all of the events that are coming up. So you can go in here and learn a little bit more about this role-like discussion with superintendents and administrators that have been doing this in the work. You can also see on the second day, we actually have the privilege of having Anne come back and join us as she talks about school site partnerships and building out school site partnerships. You'll see the schedule at a glance. If you want to go ahead and download a quick schedule, you can also learn a little bit more about speakers, attendees, and then we built out this resource library. We have over about 50 different resources that you might be able to come in and download if you want to learn a little bit more. There's a ton of resources in this CEC resource guidebook. You'll see the quadrants of collaboration here. So we invite you to take a look and learn a little bit more as you dive into the Summer Institute next week. Again, we'll start on the 22nd, promptly at 8:30, and you'll see on the agenda here, we'll start on the 22nd with the fireside chat with Tony Thurman and State Board President Linda Darling Hammond. And Ed will be facilitating that discussion. So again, feel free to roam around there, register for anything, or just sign up. You can build your own agenda and whatever helps as you start navigating that site. As we close today's session, we're going to put up a poll, and I'm going to move us along here. We're going to put up a poll. If you can give us a quick feedback, there are 5 quick questions. If you are able to give us a little evaluation on how you feel the convening went today. This is really helpful in putting together convenings in the future. We promise we can't tell who's saying what, so feel free to be as honest as you can be. And as you do that, we'll have one more slide and some Q&A time to round out the session.
While people are filling it out, can I ask a question?
Yeah, that's actually a perfect transition because we're going to have a Q&A time, so feel free.
So my question would be, is next week, would it, in the opinion of whomever, would it be more beneficial for us, the 4 people that are going to be there, CSEA, CTA / the teachers union, the superintendent and myself, a school board member, should we all be there together, or should we, how should that work, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we'll leave it up to you, but we can talk about the benefits and about each. So if you're in a room together, you'll have a quick opportunity to go into team time. There's sometimes that something is said where your team just wants to chew on it and be able to reflect. And you can do a quick pivot into a group reflection. If you're in the regular platform, you're going to have a Zoom room designated for your team. So then you're going to have to text them and then go into that team room. So it might be a little bit more of a hassle. So that quick pivot might be an opportunity for you to meet in the room and to discuss. The opportunity that you get if you attend individually is you'll be able to attend these workshops and then go into experience a lot of different workshops with your team. So if you have 4 members, you can attend 4 and move into a lot of group reflection, knowing a lot more as everybody attended a different workshop. You'll also see some role likes. So it'd be harder to pivot in a room if you're hearing 4 different workshops. So maybe if you put headphones in or something, you can have your team listen to more at the same time or simultaneously. So there's a few benefits to both. So I recommend thinking with your team and what might be the best opportunity. Any final questions as we close?
Do you see a question in the chat if you wanted to address that?
I can't see it. Jesse, do you mind reading it out loud?
Sure thing. It says, it talks about, can you put our team together during the breakout groups instead of sending us to different groups? I'm assuming within the Socio platform.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have team time designated, both times slotted in and times that you can be able to log in yourselves. So you'll have a dedicated team Zoom room for each district that you will only see on your event agenda. So we're putting those together now. So you'll see both the workshops that we're offering that are public to everybody, and then you'll have your own Zoom room built so that if you ever want to go into your team time by yourself, you can do that at whatever opportunity. So let's just say you're going to extend your team time because as good as the workshops are, and we know because we put them together, you might want to skip one. That's totally okay. We invite you to go longer into your team time and have a better discussion if you're really in the meat of something and want to take advantage of that team time. We know there aren't a lot of opportunities for this specific team to meet. So we want you to take advantage of that team time. So you have your own dedicated Zoom team room on the platform that you will only be able to access. And with that, I'm gonna say Ed and I are available here for another 10 minutes if you'd like to stick around. If you don't, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your really, really busy schedules to join us. We know it is almost the end of the school semester, or it might have ended for some of you. So we want to just thank you for joining us for the last 2.5 hours. I just mentioned to Anne that I can't believe we just went through 2.5 hours together. We are so thankful that you were able to sit through. We have a lot more coming up in the Summer Institute. So if you've already filled back the survey, we want to thank you. Our information is up on the screen. We would look forward to seeing you in next week. So if you're good to go, thank you so much.
And thank you everybody that helped me.
I invite everybody to come off mute if you'd like, and just give a big thank you to Gustavo and Jesse and each other for being a part of this. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, y'all.
Everybody.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye.